keeping those going.
Welcome to the Non-Stop Fantasy Weekly Dynasty Podcast. We are here with your hosts, Dave Reed, Ryan Wilkinson, and Joey Gallo.
Welcome into the NSFW Dynasty Podcast, Week 3, boys. We may have missed this last week. Work got in the way, so I apologize for that, but we're going to make it up to you this week. I'm your host, Dave Reed, joined by my host, Joey Gallo and Ryan Wilkinson. But that's right, three weeks on the books, boys. How you feeling?
Feeling good. Feeling better about this last week than week 2, just from an overall enjoyment and fantasy production standpoint. So, missing last week, not great, but I think we have a lot more to talk about this week. So, ready to get into it.
Yeah, same. Excited. Like Joe said, weeks 2 and 3 definitely much more exciting from a fantasy perspective than week 1. So that's been great, and we got a lot to talk about today.
That's right. Yeah, and the first couple of weeks there wasn't a lot of performances to get excited about, but week 3 definitely brought the bang, brought the boom, whatever you want to call it. But before we really dive in to the overall discussion, I want to just catch up on a couple of the some major injuries or transactions that happened in the first 3 weeks, or that we missed that we didn't get to go over because we missed last week. Nick Chubb had a brutal injury. He's out for the year. Although apparently he only tore his MCL, which if you saw the video on Twitter, it was brutal. This guy's ACL must be the most indestructible ligament of all time. But he's definitely out for the year. But hopefully that means his dynasty value and his career, which is more important, obviously, is not fully over yet. So definitely sending wishes to Nick Chubb, who's one of the most popular players. But with that, injury provided opportunity for Jerome Ford. This past week, he showed that he definitely can be a solid RB2. He wasn't overly efficient, but he got 2 touchdowns. They're definitely going to be leaning on him. He is definitely the number one in that backfield. Mike Williams also suffered an injury this past week. He tore his ACL. He is done for the year. Keenan Allen already was wheels up. I think he had 20 targets this past week. He might be the wide receiver 1 on the year already. But this will create opportunities for Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnson, the rookie. So those players they definitely have different archetypes right now. Palmer has been around, has had this opportunity, has already shown it, but he definitely needs to be owned and probably started in Dynasty. QJ, this is his chance to start showing out, so we'll see what he can do. Cam Akers, so the Rams hated him so much that they literally traded him to the Vikings for the lowest possible draft asset that you could possibly give. It wasn't a 2024 pick, wasn't a 2025 pick. It was a 2026 pick, and it was like a last round swap. And you cannot trade picks beyond 2026 so far in the NFL. So literally, you couldn't give a lower value for Cam Akers. So Kyron Williams obviously is going to get all the touches and has been in LA, but Madison has not looked great over the past couple weeks. We'll get into this more, but I think Cam Akers actually potentially has an opportunity to get back to relevance here. And Derek Carr, so I think he had an AC joint injury he suffered in this past week. He's probably going to miss a couple weeks, but that means it's Jameis time, boys. We love Jameis. He typically airs it out. Last year when he got a chance, not as much, and then Andy Dalton took over. But when he's out there, he can really let it fly, and that is exactly what you want if you're a Chris Olave owner, and even a Shashid owner too, because that's where those players thrive. So just wanted to catch up on some of those major keys, but I don't know about Joe, if there's anything in your mind you wanted to bring up.
So thoughts. I mean, you never really want Jameis Winston to be the quarterback of your actual football team, but for fantasy, he's always been great, and he's always sustained great fantasy wide receivers. So from a Chris Olave standpoint, and Michael Thomas, and pretty much everybody in that offense, even Alvin Kamara coming back, I'm excited to see. I mean, it's tough to see Derek Carr go out. He was playing well, but I think Jameis will keep the offense afloat. And yeah, interested to see. I know you mentioned the Mike Williams injury for LA. I'm most excited, I think, about Quentin Johnson. I think that his opportunity as the wide receiver 3 early season, he wasn't getting as many targets. He wasn't on the field as often. And um, I'm excited to see if he can step up. I feel like Josh Palmer hasn't exactly risen to the occasion over the last couple of years when Mike Williams has had his annual missed a couple games due to injury. So maybe this will be the year for Palmer, but excited to see what Quentin Johnson can do. Yeah, I mean, overall, it's tough, right? Like the thing that sticks out, or maybe things that stick out the most to me, the Denver offense. It's a weird situation. As a Russ owner, I'm not quite sure how to feel. Um, the offense hasn't been terrible. I've kind of liked, at least from a fantasy standpoint, what I've seen from Russ. He hasn't looked nearly as terrible as he looked last year, just from like a quality of throw and accuracy perspective. They're scoring touchdowns. Um, you know, Marvin Mims looks like I mean, a, he looks like a breakout. If they would have him on the field more, we could know for sure. Uh, but they play the Bears this week, and um, you know, what it seems like is that Sean Payton is not a huge Russ fan, and maybe he's ends up being the scapegoat for the fact that their defense can't stop the run. So who knows what the future for any of that Denver offense is going to look like. Obviously as a Russ owner, I'm hoping they get the W this week and things kind of like stand pat for a while, but can't say I'm confident about that. And yeah,
I mean, for Russ, I just want to throw out there. He feels better because he already has 6 touchdowns. It took him weeks 8 last year to finally get the 6 touchdowns. So you definitely see an improvement there.
Yeah, like they haven't looked. The offense hasn't looked bad. I mean, I think 16 points week 1 was the lowest they scored. They put up points this week. What did they score this week? They scored.
The opponent definitely put up points this week.
I was going to say. I mean, Miami put up points.
20 points. And I guess a third of that was just the punt return from Mims. So,
yeah.
It hasn't been. I don't think the offensive side of the ball is the problem. I mean, they got out to a lead last week against Washington, and then just couldn't stop. And he couldn't stop Brian Robinson, couldn't stop anyone in the offense. And we saw this week that, maybe Sam Howell isn't as good as that Denver defense made him look. So I don't know.
The Bills D is legit too. So TBD.
Yeah, and the one other thing I'll mention, the Packers offense, they look like, maybe from a team perspective that, I know that the advanced underlying metrics for Jordan Love aren't incredible, and they've gotten fortunate. They were definitely fortunate to come back and win last week after the Carr injury. But from a fantasy standpoint, it looks like they're going to continue to. They're going to be a gift that continues to give. Jordan Love is passing the ball a ton. There are so many targets to go around that offense, and we haven't even seen what it would look like with Christian Watson out there. Aaron Jones hasn't been out there the last 2 weeks. So Packers offense, they look strong, and they look like potentially a division winner. I think Jordan Love is the number 4 fantasy quarterback on the season.
Yep.
So those of us who...
Those weapons should be back Thursday against the Lions, which will be very interesting to watch.
Yeah. Those of us who boldly predicted Jordan Love would be a top 10 fantasy quarterback are feeling pretty good. Let's see if he can keep it going.
Yeah, and the opposite of that, those of us that predicted Daniel Jones would be a top 3 quarterback are not feeling so great. The only general promise I'll really add is the Giants, and I'd probably add the Commanders in there two offenses I was a little high on that it seems like aren't going to be that great this year. Hopefully they can turn it around, but neither one has looked good. There was a lot of hype for Daniel Jones, Darren Waller. Um, you know, Barkley missed last week, but it's been kind of a mess there. So we'll see if they can turn it around.
To be fair to the Giants, to get this later, they've played two elite defenses, so I'm hoping things will turn around. When they finally got a bad defense, it took out one half. Daniel Jones had a monster game in a half, so we'll see. But I don't feel comfortable, I'll say it, but I'm hopeful things get better. But yeah, no, it's been rough sledding.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's turn the vibes around first. So now that we've had 3 weeks down, and obviously 2 weeks that we get to dive a little bit more into on this pod, we finally, as I mentioned in week 3, had a lot of boom performances. So let's talk about some of the
boom shakalaka
performances that we've had so far. It's a little NBA jams for you. So first, I want to hit upon some of the quarterbacks. The two that stick out to me, at least, that have been performing higher than what I think most people's ADP or draft value really was, are the rookie C.J. Stroud, who week 1 didn't look that great, but the past 2 weeks have been awesome, and he's airing it out, and he does look like he belongs. And as Joe mentioned before, Jordan Love as well, who's already the QB4. So those two guys, I'm going on, and as Joe mentioned, Love, he's been great for fantasy. His completion percentage, though, which is some of the underlying stats, is at I believe 53.4%, which is atrocious. The only quarterback worse than him at 52.4%, I think everyone could guess, is Zach Wilson, the worst quarterback in the NFL. So that's not someone you want to just be edging out very, very closely. And his touchdown percentage, I think, was above 11% before this past week. I think it's down to about 7.3%, which is still very, very high, above the league average. So hard to sustain that, but he also hasn't had Christian Watson at all or Aaron Jones. So who knows? Maybe he can just be a very efficient thrower. But what are your guys' thoughts on those two quarterbacks? And if there's anyone else that you think we should be discussing.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, both of those guys have looked great. The only other one I'll add, I mentioned him after week 1, but, Baker Mayfield has been very serviceable. He didn't look great last week, but the first 2 weeks, he had 2 20-point games to start the season, and he's only QB 17 on the year, but, there was a lot of talk if he was even going to be a starter. So where you drafted him, I feel like you've already been returned with pretty good value.
Yeah, and I'll just echo, obviously Love, but I've liked what I've seen from C.J. Stroud as well, and their defense isn't great. They're going to be in a lot of negative game script, and they have explosive weapons. I mean, we'll probably get into their explosive weapons at the wide receiver position pretty soon when we're talking about wide receiver booms, but there's certainly some upside with that whole offense.
Yeah, we'll jump. That's a good segue. We'll jump to the wide receivers now. I mean, I don't think many people were super high on the Texans wide receiver core going into the season. I know Nico Collins was someone that was a sleeper, someone I personally liked as well. And he's showing up for sure. He's showing that he could potentially be an alpha, but the player that C.J. Stroud told the organization to draft themselves, and Tank Dell, has also been showing up and had a massive game. And he's a small, itty-bitty guy, but he gets open. And the way the NFL has been changing, these smaller, fast guys who get separation are really thriving right now. So those two are really stepping up. Mike Evans, who I know Joey drafted, and like many people were concerned with Baker, but Baker actually seems to be a much better fit for the style player Mike Evans has been with the deep throws, and Mike Evans has been crushing week after week. Keenan Allen, I mentioned before, I think is wide receiver 1 already, and I don't think that's going to slow down anytime soon. Not as much a surprise that he's producing, but I think to the level that he's producing has been surprising a lot of people. Another one is Adam Thielen, which many people have written off. He's very old. He's on a bad team with a rookie quarterback, but he's producing. And now I think Bryce Young might start this week, but Andy Dalton last week obviously was just feeding him the ball the whole time. You got rookie Marvin Mims, who doesn't get a lot of playing time, but doesn't need a lot. He makes easily the most of his opportunities. With long touchdowns. I think he returned a touchdown last week, but also getting long receptions. And then from the Rams, like no one really thought much of the Rams other than Cooper Kupp, and he hasn't played yet. But Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell just keep showing up. Puka Nacua had after that first week, we talked about potentially buying him. Good luck now. Like it's going to take so much to get this guy. He's on record breaking pace and just is always open. And Tutu Atwell. Also, another player who was written off is thriving as well. He should have scored multiple touchdowns last week to cash the first touchdown prop bet that Joey and I took. Very upset about that. But yeah, what are your thoughts on some of these wide receivers that we touched upon?
Yeah, so Puka's one where obviously a little bit of a down week this week relative to the past couple for him. Curious, we're going into week 4 now. I know this is a Dynasty podcast, but what do you do with Puka and or Tutu in a redraft format right now? Do you it feels like to me they could be trade for targets. Maybe Puka could be a trade for target if you're able to sell the owner on. He had a little bit of a down week, and he's in the Cooper Kupp slot, and Kupp may be back after just one more missed game. Do you think that they're tradeaways for that? The offense is going to change once Kupp comes back, and I just don't know if either I'm not sure who it is between the two whose value is going to take a hit, but I almost feel like this is the opportunity right now before week 4 where you kind of got to take some action if you want to bet on one of those guys, either to be the one who retains value or be the one who loses value. And I'm just not sure which way I would lean.
Yeah, I think that's the question, right? Puka is actually wide receiver 7 on the season, and Tutu's wide receiver 12, which is just crazy because before the season started, all the talk was Cooper Kupp. I still question, how healthy Kupp is. So even when he comes back, is he as effective as he's been in the past, especially when they have these guys producing now? But yeah, I mean, it's a good question because if you're going to trade them and get top value, it probably would be right now. I can't imagine that either one of them moves up much higher than 7 and 12 on the year. What do you think, Dave?
Well, I am a Puka owner in redraft, and actually multiple places. The Megla Bowl with the fantasy footballs, I actually drafted him, so I didn't have to beat him on waivers. And then in the redraft with Ryan that I'm in, I actually traded for him because another owner was stuck with roster limits, and I was able to get him for just Kenny Gainwell, which feels great now with seeing Swift blow up, which we'll get to. But I'm a believer in Puka. I think he's you don't just magically get 35 targets in your first 2 weeks as a rookie without being something special. So even when Kupp comes back, I just don't see how they don't make him involved. I also think the Rams will probably operate in a lot of 3 wide receiver sets because Tyler Higbee stinks, and that's their tight end one. And he can still be in the field potentially with 3 wide receivers, but I don't see the default being them putting 2 tight ends out there, and one of these guys has to get off the field that often. And McVay is a wizard. He'll rotate these guys. Cooper Kupp will play outside. He'll play in slot. Nacua will do the same. Tutu seems like someone will probably always be on the outside just because of his speed. But I would not be selling them low. I'm willing to trade anyone for the right value. But the other thing Ryan kind of mentioned, I haven't heard a thing about Cooper Kupp at all. I haven't heard him running routes, looking good, nothing.
I don't think he's
since the
back
season started.
after week 4. I think it's extended. So yeah,
you would at this point, if he was one more week away, you would start hearing that they're practicing, looking you haven't heard anything from Cooper Kupp. So I'm I have him in one league. I'm just concerned when I think he will come back. I'm not concerned about him not playing, but again, you heard their dialogue earlier, they were getting a special consultant for his hamstrings. they are taking it very, very cautiously with him, and they can do it now more, seeing what these two wide receivers done. So I don't think Cooper Kupp's coming back after 4 weeks. And I think the team is really believing in Nacua. And even like this past week, it was a down week. He almost had a touchdown anyway. And like every wide receiver one has down week. I think A.J. Brown and like C.D. Lamb's down week were far worse than this down week. So like I'm not overly concerned with Nacua. I would still be trying to buy on any owners who think that maybe his value is going to dissipate soon, but I don't think it's going to go out. Granted, he won't have the week 1 and week 2 performances that often once Kupp's back, but I still think he's going to be a very strong asset.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess now that I think about it, right, like he's probably tough to buy. Like I'm thinking if you're making a move with him right now, like if I was an owner, which unfortunately I'm not, I would love to be. I'd probably be dangling him out there trying to get, a locked in wide receiver, 1 or 2, like maybe offer him, to the Devonta Smith owner, something like that. I would much rather have Devonta Smith rest of season than Puka. And that just feels like something that you might be able to get done off of a fresh week of AJ Brown getting force fed the ball. So you're right. I mean, it's all assuming that Cooper Kupp comes back and stays on the field. If he does, you would think the offense runs through him. But yeah, and I mean, as far as other wide receivers, the Marvin Mims situation, I heard there was a little Russ hype piece on X today. Maybe he's trying to encourage coaching to get Mims on the field a little bit more. But yeah,
I love Mims, so I'd love to see it. He said, Russ said he has no ceiling, which one might interpret it as unlimited, which is a Russ Wilson quote.
Yeah, and it was good to see Jamar Chase getting back into the action.
Finally.
I mean, at the cost of T. Higgins, it's interesting how those guys are seemingly kind of like passing back and forth productive weeks.
We'll get the T. Higgins for sure.
I know Dave was a little down on him this year, I think, right?
Yeah. That was a big sell for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then the only other one I'd re-mention is Keenan Allen. He had 20 targets, 18 catches last week, which is just crazy. And now
and threw a touchdown.
Yeah, and threw a touchdown. And Mike Williams is out. You would imagine they're going to force feed him the ball, but I looked it up. The record is 23 targets in a week, so 20 targets is pretty crazy.
Was that, I'm going to guess, Brandon Marshall? Do you happen to remember? I just remember Brandon Marshall getting force-fed targets too, but we don't have to get into it if you didn't have it in. But yeah, no, I think it's wheels up for Keenan. As long as he stays healthy, that's always kind of been the rub on him.
Yeah, you know what, Dave? It actually was Roddy White in 2010.
Oh, wow. Okay.
23 targets, yeah.
That's a name I haven't heard in a bit. And so I mean, moving forward onto some of the running backs we had some monster weeks over the past couple weeks. So we alluded to this with the Broncos game. The Dolphins smashed both Mostert and A-Chan, I think is how we pronounce his name now. Both had 4 touchdowns each, and I think Mostert had like 70 yards, and like A-Chan had over 200 yards. It was just like video game numbers. A lot of people were starting Mostert. He is older. I think he's 30, 31. But A-Chan, I have him. I debated it, but I was like, I had a feeling this would be his breakout game, but not like, I thought it would be like 80 yards and like a score. And I'd be like, all right, now I can use him moving forward. Now I'm upset that I just missed the best game of his career, but very, very excited about him going forward. DeAndre Swift is just back from the dead. He is the Undertaker meme, just over and over again. Did nothing week 1, but the past 2 weeks has looked like an elite back behind that Eagles, Philadelphia offensive line. Just like shot out of a cannon every single run. It's crazy how he really, he's properly named with Swift. And then another guy who just showed out as someone who you were not expecting to is Zach Moss is just like getting all the work. I think he had 30 rushes last week, and a lot of time he's like a plotter. He had a reception for a touchdown that was very impressive. He like jumped up over the defender to catch it, which I was like, that's not Zach Moss. He can't do that. But it was very impressive. So that's a guy that honestly may have been on waivers to start the year, and now is looking like a potential top 20 back as long as Jonathan Taylor, is out. So those are just some of the names that came to mind. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on those players or other players you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, Zach Moss has been an absolute steal if you drafted him. People were drafting Deion Jackson over him, and Deion Jackson's gone now. So he's averaging 20 points a game over the last 2 weeks. He looks like the back. Jonathan Taylor is another one. Is he coming back? I don't know. I haven't heard anything. It doesn't seem like he, may be back anytime soon. So if Zach Moss gets a full season, he looks like he's going to be a real steal. And then DeAndre Swift, he's looked incredible. He's always had those games where he's looked really good and then, kind of had up and down seasons. So we'll see if it lasts. They do have Gainwell there too, but right now he looks like the guy, and he's another one who, wasn't drafted very high. So if you have him, he's another definite steal at this point. And then Miami, I mean, what can you say about Miami? That whole team has just looked unbelievable, like you said, putting up video game numbers. So
they're the fastest men alive.
It's crazy. I think I saw a stat where all three of like the fastest guys on the field this season were on Miami. It was, it was just insane how quick they are.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. They have some additional depth pieces too at the running back position who haven't been out there. Once their full running back room, I think Jeff Wilson Jr. and who's the fourth? There's one other. That's right, Ahmed. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see after 8chan. I keep wanting to say 4chan. Maybe that'll be his official NSFW nickname, Devon 4chan. After his blow up this week, if that will kind of solidify his role in the offense moving forward, or he'll need injury to Mostert.
Which Mostert does get injured, but I agree. Wilson, we'll see though if he comes back. That's his injury is a little ominous.
Yeah. And then one other guy I wanted to mention was just an interesting one is Kenneth Walker, just because he was such a he was a scary proposition during draft season for both dynasty and redraft with Zach Charbonnet on board, and Charbonnet's involvement in the offense, his snap percentage has actually been going up steadily week 1, week 2, week 3. But Kenneth Walker has looked good. He's scoring. He gets quite a bit of carries inside the red zone. So, maybe it's an opportunity to try and look to capitalize and get some value for him. But as of right now, he's looked strong, and it feels like one of those situations where we should have just known based on how good he was last year and how it usually takes rookies a little bit to get ramped up in the offense, that Zach Charbonnet wasn't just going to come in and establish himself from day one as a 50-50 timeshare. So this is, if anything, if Charbonnet ever were to get injured or whatnot, then, Kenneth Walker you're looking at like a top 2 or 3 running back for the duration of the season. So,
yeah, it was a poor dud draft pick by me. Not looking great right now, but Charbonnet, I do, as you mentioned, is getting more carries, more snaps, more touches inside the 5, like within the 5 yards of the end zone. So, who knows how it shapes up going forward, but I think it's undeniable that Kenneth Walker, based on where he was getting drafted, is going to get the job done. And obviously last year, he took some time to get ramped up and that had all the work. Maybe same thing happens to Sharper. He just needs to get worked up, but I can't see Ken Walker going away completely. So, that's a good call out. And then last one for tight ends. There's usually not a lot of booms in tight end, but my God, we got one out of a rookie, which Sam Laporta. He is on like a record-setting pace for a rookie tight end. I think he's already like a top. I would consider him already a top 5 tight end probably the rest of the year, the way he's performing, the way the offense is using him. He has been a stud week in and week out. But let's see what you got, how enamored you both are.
Yeah, I mean, I actually drafted him in our redraft league in a late round, hoping that, he would do something. But like you said, he's breaking records. He looks great. They're using him heavily in that offense, and there aren't a ton of tight ends out there. And even some of the top tight ends we've seen not do so great this year. So he's looking great.
Yeah, I mean, 11 targets for any tight end is impressive. And for a rookie who's only playing his 3rd career game, the offense, obviously Jared Goff is able to support multiple pass catchers. And yeah, I mean, I would, there's a select group of tight ends who I would rather have over Laporta the rest of the season. It's probably Hawkinson, Kelsey, maybe Andrews, and that's probably it.
Yeah.
I think I would take Laporta next. Yeah. So
yeah, it's like I said, top 5, and he looks the part outside. It's not like he's just getting lucky or getting like end zone target. Like, he looks legitimate on the field and breaking away from the defender.
Yeah, so. And I just want, if we're while we're on the subject of rookie tight ends, just like a 5-second vent, because I think that this is how Dalton Kincaid
I love that
would otherwise look if Josh Allen would stop throwing the ball to Dawson Knox. And I just don't fucking understand why you would draft Dalton Kincaid just to continue to throw the ball to Dawson Knox 9 times a game. And not that Dawson Knox is terrible, but Kincaid looks great every time he gets the ball. He's fast, he's athletic, and I feel like, yeah, like at a certain point this season, something will happen where he'll have the opportunity to be unleashed, and then we'll kind of wonder why it wasn't happening right from day one. But yeah, that's just bitter old me who owns Dalton Kincaid in about 16 leagues and owns Sam Laporta in 0.
I do think Kincaid will come on more and more as the year progresses, but it does seem like Knox is going to be involved somewhat throughout the year. So
I also think, like, I'm not overly concerned about Kincaid. I think it just stings because Laporta exists and he's a rookie. Like, this doesn't happen with rookie tight ends out of the gate. Like, Kincaid's not doing anything wrong, and you wouldn't. And honestly, if your realistic expectations were Kincaid wasn't going to do that much out of the gate, but when you see another rookie being like, "Yo, what? He's doing it. Why don't we do it over here?" We see it's a proof of concept. Let's make it happen. So it stings a little bit more.
Yeah, it's like he's kind of the same. Like like every time they throw the ball to Knox, I'm like, wait, is that Kincaid? No, it's Knox again. Like I just don't know why they have to have like 2 of the exact same guy out there.
They look the same. Yeah, they're
like the same exact guy, except Kincaid is faster and more athletic and doesn't drop the ball as frequently. So
we'll see. They'll make an adjustment.
Yeah. While we're in the boom section, I have to say I feel like the rookie class, in terms of like, contributing right out of the gate, has been pretty boom this year. Maybe I don't pay attention as much, in years past, but I feel like there's a lot of rookies that you can instantly throw in your lineup, even in redraft formats, which I feel like is pretty rare.
Yeah, they usually take, honestly, a few more weeks to start showing up, especially for like the wide receivers and definitely the tight ends. Quarterbacks almost never, but this year we've seen a lot of early season performances. Obviously, it's a long season. There's going to be more ups and downs. But like last year, you saw a lot of rookie wide receivers step up as well. There's rookie running backs usually do pretty well. I think there's always like at least 2 in the top 24 almost every single year. But it's funny that a lot of the rookie wide receivers who blew up last year, so far to date, their situation hasn't been great, or they haven't had like those blow up games yet that we're seeing out of the current rookies. So still a long season, but yeah, to your point, like this is pretty shocking to see as many rookies. Like even we didn't mention Zay Flowers too, another rookie.
Yeah.
Like he's been a target machine. He didn't have as many yards the past couple weeks, but like he looks unbelievable in the field. Like he looks like the real deal. So a lot of these rookies are showing out early.
Yeah.
But with the good must come the bad. So we're going to move to the busted section. So yeah, there's been some players that we got to have a real conversation about. So starting with the quarterbacks. This was I think we mentioned as a sell in the week 1 episode. It has not gotten better for Justin Fields. He just doesn't look like an NFL quarterback. I'm sure he'll still be good for fantasy as long as he's playing, but I don't think he's going to be the Bears quarterback after this year potentially. Burrow has been bad. He does have a bit of an excuse. His calf he re-injured it. He's not as mobile, but it's you are concerned because you don't know when you're going to get like fully healthy Burrow going forward, which does impact the overall team as well. And I'll even say Trevor Lawrence has stats-wise for fantasy hasn't been as great. I'm not as concerned personally for Trevor Lawrence. He's had a lot of touchdowns missed by like inches. I think like week 2, I think he had like 3 or 4 catches where literally the guy caught the ball and then stepped out of bounds with one of his feet. So like that game could have been completely different, and we wouldn't be having this conversation if they just kept their feet inside. Even this past week is a similar story. So I'm not as concerned. With that being said, the Jags as a whole haven't looked as great. So I think they can improve there, but got to call it out. He's definitely disappointed through 3 weeks, but I'm not as concerned as I am, say, for like Justin Fields, who I think everyone's concerned about him. But where are you guys at with the quarterback bust so far?
Yeah, it's tough. The Burrow injury, assuming it's the injury, right? It looks like it's the injury. He looks uncomfortable. You could almost just tell, like from the first throw of the first week. We kind of mentioned this on the last pod. It just like he hasn't looked healthy all season at any point in the season. It seemed like last week maybe a little bit in the first couple quarters, but then he re-injured. I almost would just prefer he go on IR, to be totally honest, at this point, as an owner in a couple leagues, and obviously as a Jamar Chase owner in this league. I'd rather just have him miss 4 weeks and know that when he comes back, we're having a reasonable likelihood of, full strength Burrow versus, putting him out there and sending his weapons out there every week with like a 50-50 shot that they put up like a major dud, So T. Higgins, I was playing against him in 2 leagues last week and he catches 2 touchdowns. Then he comes back this week and, almost gooses. And, Jamar Chase didn't really do much of anything the first 2 weeks. This past week, he catches, double-digit passes. So I think that the whole offense is going to continue to stink until Burrow's 100%. And I think Burrow's not going to be 100% until he gives his calf enough time to recover. So, like, what are we doing here? Are we just going to kind of hang out until he aggravates it so much that he can't play and then he's forced to miss 4 games on IR? Or is that going to happen voluntarily? It's probably going to be the former because he's a gamer and he doesn't want to, voluntarily miss games if he can be out there. But from a fantasy perspective, I don't necessarily know that I see things turning around with the Cincinnati offense anytime soon. So that's a concern.
Yeah,
for sure.
Gotta let Joe Burrow's calf rest, grow up, and turn into that cow.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Jags, I'm not going to say that I think Trevor Lawrence looks bad. I think that Trevor Lawrence looks like the perfectly mid-average quarterback that he is.
I was waiting for this part of the podcast. I knew it was coming.
He hasn't looked bad. He's looked just about what he is, which is a guy that can make good throws. And I will agree, right? Like it was Zay Jones stepping out of bounds barely 2 different times in week 2 or week 1. And then, last
Calvin
week,
Ridley did it, ran into a
yeah,
field goal.
yeah. But when you're not able to, like when you're getting your ass kicked by the Texans, that's not necessarily ideal. So I think,
I will say the Texans' defense is the new head coach has brought around. They got pieces there, but still not a good look. I'm not going to make an excuse for them there.
I think they need to. But again, right? Like everybody was kind of expecting that all of these quarterbacks would take this big leap going from last year to this year. We've kind of seen it happen quite a bit with guys like, Jalen Hurts and whatnot. And, I just don't think there's that much leaping going on at the moment. But it's a long season.
A lot of time left.
Yeah, it's a long season. And like I said, I don't think Trevor Lawrence has looked bad. He hasn't killed you. He hasn't crapped your team, but he just hasn't been like a top, like a QB1, like you kind of hope that he would be.
Yeah, I think Trevor Lawrence has time to turn it around. I don't know if I would be super concerned there. Right out of the gate, he obviously hasn't looked as good as you were hoping where you drafted him, but his situation, I feel like he can turn it around. Burrow, like Joe said, it's just really seems like the injury. So if he can get healthy, then I think you get Joe Burrow back. The one to hammer home for me is Justin Fields. He just doesn't look good, and I've seen a lot of buy low articles on him, but I'm just not buying it.
Out.
Like you said, does he even have a starting job in 2 years? I don't know. So if you have him in Dynasty, he's still serviceable this year. He's scored over 10 points all 3 weeks, but as a real life quarterback, at some point, they're going to have to win games, and he's just not getting it done. So I can't imagine he's the quarterback for too much longer.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, he's the second worst quarterback, I think, right now in the NFL.
Yeah.
Zach Wilson obviously is the worst. But he's not worthy of this discussion.
Desmond Ridder would like a word too.
Yeah, he has
Would you honestly? Who would you rather have in your actual NFL team, Desmond Ridder or Justin Fields? Because I don't know if I'd want Fields over Ridder on my actual team.
I would definitely rather have Fields. Ridder's
won games. Fields hasn't. Fields hasn't won any games.
Though. He's won games. They've won games in spite of him. They have a pretty good defense. They have a great rushing attack. They have what seems to be competent coaching, although who really knows? Every single week I watch him on Red Zone, and he is just missing.
That means he's in the red zone. Think about that.
Guys by
you didn't watch.
You didn't see Fields in red zone.
He makes at least 3 throws a week that make me want to absolutely puke. He's an atrocious quarterback.
I'll tell you when you saw Fields in red zone, it was a turnover or a defensive score. Listen, I am not here to pump up Ridder. I think he stinks as well. It's more to rip downfield.
Yeah, that's a good point. Ridder hasn't looked great.
Yeah, no, I don't think many people expected it from him though. But with these bad quarterbacks, a lot of their weapons have suffered as well. So other wide receivers in the busted section, Joe mentioned T. Higgins. He had the one good game week 2 with a couple touchdowns, but that was sandwiched around 2 games with 8 targets and almost nothing to show for it. In week 1, nothing. In week 2, I think he had like 3 points or something. Calvin Ridley, as I mentioned, week 1 blew up. Since then, I think he has like maybe 12 overall points. It's like he hasn't been getting it done. Definitely getting frustrated there. For the Bears, had DJ Moore. We'll get to a lot of Bears weapons in this section. But DJ Moore, he saved it with like a garbage time touchdown, but I would be not excited to have DJ Moore on my team right now. I think he'll be fine, serviceable in a deep league or our format where you're starting 3 flex on top of 2 wide receivers, but I would not want him to be a key piece. Jahan Dotson, like Joe and I have been talking on the side, like we love Dotson. What are the Commanders doing with Dotson there? Like they're just not utilizing him right. You're seeing like Curtis Samuel doing like routes down the field, and those should be Dotson routes. He's always getting open, and they're just using him the wrong way. JSN, I don't know what's going on with JSN right now. His snaps are going down. He's at like 44% this past week. Bobo, or whatever the guy's name, had 41% of snaps and scored a touchdown. So, like, I don't know why you're not utilizing JSN more. Bateman, I don't think he's much of a surprise. I was out on him going into this year, but I think he's starting to solidify his fact as someone who's just never going to be a thing in the NFL. But those are some of the key busts that I've been noticing in the wide receiver group. But I don't know if you guys have other thoughts on these players.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on Dotson because he's been probably the biggest letdown.
That's what I was going to say. 12 points through 3 weeks.
Yeah, last year, over the course of the season, averaged 15 yards per reception, and going down in the weeks had long reception of 30, 20, 25, 60, 30, 30, 40, 24. Whereas this year, I think his long reception on the year is 18 yards. He's averaging 8 yards a reception. He's got 16 total targets on the season. Meanwhile, Curtis Samuel and Diami Brown have 16 total targets on the season as well. So it's not only are they not using him the same way that they used him last year, not using him the way that he was used in the preseason, but like you said, right? Guys like Curtis Samuel and Diami Brown are out there getting targets that should be going to Dotson as well, right? Like Curtis Samuel's been in the league for like 7 years, and like he is fine. He's an average receiver, but
But he's an average receiver.
Yeah, right? Like
Dotson is elite. What are you doing?
I think that there are brighter days ahead for Dotson, and I say that because things are going to change quite a bit with this offense as the year kind of progresses, right? Like things happen, right? Like injuries happen. The thing about Curtis Samuel, not saying that I'm banking on a Curtis Samuel injury. I hope he doesn't get injured, but he's an injury prone guy. I actually think Diami Brown didn't even play week 3. So there's possibility there. And then Sam Howell had a tough week last week against Buffalo. And, who's to say that we don't end up seeing Jacoby Brissett out there? And who's to say that Jacoby Brissett doesn't hyper target Jahan Dotson? Or I don't know if it's a scheme thing. I don't know if it's Eric Bieniemy's offense. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'm not cutting Dotson in any league, in any redraft.
Absolutely not.
And he might, if you can go and pick him up for pennies on the dollar. I personally would still be interested in stashing him. If somebody drops him, pick him up. But it's perplexing for me to see what's happening with him. It's unfortunate, but hopefully they'll get it fixed.
I'm glad you mentioned Sam Howell because we haven't really talked about him, but I feel like he also deserved to be mentioned in the disappointment section.
There were a little expectation for Howell outside of me.
Yeah, I was going to
I was very excited.
But yeah, I don't know if it's so much a usage thing for Dotson as it is just an overall offense thing where Howell hasn't looked good. So like you said, maybe there's a quarterback change in the future and things turn around for him. I think long term, he's still a good player to have, but definitely hasn't lived up to the hype that he had coming into week 1.
Yeah, and then moving down to some running backs. Surprised to see this one on, but the past 2 weeks have not been great. Breece Hall, the Jets are just a mess. I think that's just really what it comes down to. But he hasn't been getting the usage you're wanting, and he needs to have breakaway runs, basically. And if he doesn't get those, it seems like he's going to have a bad day right now. And the offense as a whole and the Jets and the organization is just a disaster. So kind of want to stay away from there. Obviously, we didn't talk about Garrett Wilson in the previous section, but I think that goes without saying. Until Trevor Siemian starts playing quarterback, I don't think you're going to get much going in the Jets offense. Najee Harris might be the least efficient runner of all time. I saw a stat during the last game, and at first I was like, is this the whole team stat or is this a Najee stat? But his name was associated. And at the time, I think it was like 184 yards below expectation on the year. We're 3 weeks in. How is that even possible to have that? Well, like he's always getting tacked behind the line. And probably sort of as a similar stat line to that is Derrick Henry. And I know Joe, I think, was mentioned this is something to get out on. This might be the year Derrick Henry ends. And I'm definitely concerned. It's the first time we're seeing another running back in the Tennessee like get more snaps than Henry in games, and it's in a rookie. And Henry has not been looking great on the field. He's getting tackled behind the line, and Joe, I'll let him get more into it before, but his style run, he needs to like pick up some speed. And if he's getting tackled behind the line, like you're not going to get much done. But and one other one who wasn't as high of expectation, but Khalil Herbert just to really pound on the Bears. The thing is, he doesn't look bad to me, but they're just not giving him the ball. I don't know if he's had like double-digit carries a game yet, but he was someone that started getting a little bit of hype as the season started, and it's just not there right now. But yeah, those are some of the major call-outs that have caught my eye in the bus section, but I don't know if there's others that are catching your eyes or other ones you want to kind of elaborate on. I know, Joe, you probably have something to say about Derrick Henry and potentially Najee.
Yeah, I mean, with Henry, part of it too is they're not a very good team, Tennessee. So, they're not really in a position to give him the 20 or 25 carries a game that he's been getting historically, and he seems to be a little bit slower. And he's only on the field for 50% of snaps. He's not really catching passes. Yeah, it seems like a bad situation. And yeah, Dave mentioned he was a sell for me early in the season and in redraft. In Dynasty too, like if I could get anything usable, I would probably look to cut bait, sooner than later. But not to say that he's not going to have games this season where he produces. He certainly will, but I think that his days as an RB1 are probably in the rear view. One other guy that I'll mention, Dameon Pierce, has been pretty rough from a yards per carry perspective. Houston's offensive line kind of stinks, which was the issue for CJ Stroud in week one. And I actually think, maybe I won't say they stink. I think they've had a number of injuries on their offensive line. So when you have cluster injuries and you have these second and third string guys playing on the O-line, then it's kind of tough. But they've been a little better. CJ's just kind of been running around a lot more. Dameon Pierce, 2 yards a carry last week, 2.2 yards a carry this week. He hit the waiver wire in a 10-team league that I'm in. I actually ended up picking him up for 30 or
I don't think you should
30 or
drop
40 fab in another one of my leagues. But that's just how people are feeling about Dameon Pierce right now. He's going to keep getting the opportunities, and it's the opportunities are what matters, right? So he's averaging like 14 or 15 rushes and 3 targets a game. Which obviously at the running back position, that's not something you should be dropping. But he's been disappointing and seems to be more of an offensive line issue than anything else.
Yeah, I think I saw the stat. I forgot the exact numbers, but the gist was it might have been week 2. He had, I think, 34 or 35 something yards after contact or on the game, but he finished the game with like 31 yards. So that means he was on almost every carry contacted behind the line of scrimmage, which is just insane. So yeah, it's definitely an offensive line. He's a talented player. I think most people see that, but like his situation is rough, and it doesn't look like it's going to get better for the next 4 weeks based on the schedule.
No. And he's only out there for 50% of snaps, too. Devin Singletary is getting run because the team's losing, and they need to have a pass catcher out on the field. So it's just, I think,
which was a concern we aired.
Yeah, and in addition, right? Yeah, like you said, I'm not sure what their upcoming schedule is. Pittsburgh this week, then Atlanta, then New Orleans. Atlanta and New Orleans are both good run defenses,
and then a bye.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I'm not. I I added him in the league where he was dropped, but I'm not rushing to put him in my starting lineup. That's for sure. So
Yeah, and a lot of those guys, are just on bad teams, which I feel like really kills value. But two other guys I'll mention, Alexander Madison and Cam Akers, who are now on the same team. Madison was supposed to be the guy with Dalvin Cook leaving town. He's had huge fumble issues, struggled heavily the first two games.
Got lucky last
Got
week.
lucky
He fumbled
last
like
week.
3 times that got called
Yeah,
overturned.
he's just can't hold on to the ball. I don't know what happened, but fantasy wise, he's had the volume to still be serviceable, but in comes Cam Akers now to presumably kill that volume. And then, yeah, I mean, Cam Akers was supposed to have a resurgence on the Rams, looked amazing to finish out last year. I was honestly a little high on him, but after week two, he was shipped off to another team. So we'll see what he does on the Vikings. But overall, right now, I would say both of their values are just way down to where they were before the season started.
Yep, and moving down to the tight ends again. Not a lot of tight ends that we had super high expectations for. One that I think a lot of people had some reservations going through this year, but Kyle Pitts kind of really just hitting on the notes that we were worried about in this offense. But the main reason I want to call him out is, and this is just more of the insanity of what goes on in the Falcons offense. But I believe John Smith has like the same percentage of targets or same number of targets as Kyle Pitts. John Smith, why is he so involved in taking targets away from Drake London? I think he has like 17 targets and Pitts has 17 targets or something very close to that. It's absolutely insane. I did pick him up because that if they're going to use him like that, why not grab him in tight end premium? But it's the Falcons offense is going to throw fits for a lot of fantasy players for a long time until Arthur Smith is no longer the coach there. But another one that has disappointed a bit. I'm not as concerned yet, but Darren Waller, was drafted as a top 5 tight end. We just mentioned earlier. I think people would rather have Sam Laporta over Darren Waller, which seems like a crazy statement 3 weeks ago, but this is the world we are now living in. And I know, Ryan, this was something that you were calling as well, so I wanted to hear some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, he's tight end 9 on the season, so I wouldn't say it's super horrible, but like you said, he was drafted as the tight end, usually like 4, sometimes even 3 off the board. So definitely been a disappointment so far. Giants have played some tough defenses, so if that offense overall can turn it around a bit, then his value might go up. But where you drafted him, it hasn't been great.
Yeah, and then before we move into our final section with a league update, any other surprises or notes from the past couple weeks that you guys wanted to call out? I don't know, Joe, if there's anything in your mind.
yeah, I mean, one team that we didn't talk about at all really are the Cardinals, and they've actually looked pretty good. Frisky, I think, is the right word, right?
Frisky is a
They're a
good
frisky
term. Yeah, I
team.
wouldn't say good. I wouldn't call
Yeah,
them
they're a
good.
frisky team. They're first of all, James Conner looks great, and
Yes.
he's got a ton of bursts for somebody who's been in the league for a while and who I thought maybe his best years are behind him. And they're clearly trying to win games. They were they played a strong first half against the Giants, almost beat the Giants. They kicked Dallas's ass last week. They were celebrating. Jonathan Gannon is like the most cringeworthy guy, but the team's playing hard for him. And it's good to see as somebody who has kind of been hoping for Kyler to get back out there. Now, that being said, I don't know when Kyler will actually get back out there. It seems like they're planning on taking it slow with him, and it might not be a situation where he comes off the pup and then is immediately right out there. In fact, some of the things that we're hearing seem to indicate that he might actually get a couple weeks to ramp up before he gets back out there. But for guys like Connor and Hollywood Brown and Zach Ertz and who you thought maybe would be useless from a fantasy perspective this year, Joshua Dobbs has been a functional quarterback, and they're playing hard, and they're definitely not in tank mode. So I think that they're that they're an interesting team, and some of their guys will continue to be interesting for fantasy, at least in the near
Do you
term.
think the Jets traded for Dobbs? Do you think they wish they did that?
I don't know what the Jets want. Like,
I think
I
so.
I think that part of the Jets' hesitation to add another quarterback right now is that they still feel committed to Rodgers. And if they go out and trade for Kirk Cousins, or if they have to bring in some low level, like, non challenging schmuck, like Trevor Simeon.
like
Trevor
Dobbs.
Simeon is like the perfect example of a guy who's
Yeah,
like
Simeon is a
not
great
nearly
option.
as terrible as Zach Wilson, but he's like somebody who they can just like happily kick to the curb next year when Rodgers is ready to come back, right? Like if they trade for
Yep.
Cousins and then they make a playoff run, now they got a problem on their hands. Maybe the same thing with Josh Dobbs. To be totally honest, if Josh Dobbs was the Jets,
No, you can. Dobbs is constantly kicked
yeah,
from team to team.
but
You
if
can
if he
easily.
plays, I mean, he's playing significantly better quarterback right now than Zach
Yeah.
Wilson. So I think that's probably, like they really have to strike the balance between. I know they want to compete this year, but they also want. They also gave Aaron Rodgers money. They want him to be their quarterback next year once he's healthy. So I don't know. It's a tough spot if you ask me. I'm not really sure what I would do, but it's not going well. I don't envy Robert Saleh right now.
Yeah. What about you, Rye?
Yeah, one guy we haven't mentioned who I thought has at least exceeded expectations is Jacoby Myers. He's looked pretty good. He missed a game, but when he's been out there, he had 2 touchdowns in week 1, I think, and he's had 12 targets, I think, last week. So he's looked really good when he's been out there. Jimmy G's been feeding him the ball. Obviously, Adams is the top guy there, but as the number 2, he's looked pretty serviceable and definitely someone you could use on your team.
Yeah, no, I love that call of Myers. He's definitely a key piece of that offense there. I think honestly he could be a serviceable wide receiver too most weeks. So I think that is someone who provides a lot of value based on where he was typically drafted, whether it be dynasty or redraft. Couple other items for me that just want to call out. I know I mentioned Kyron. He's getting all the work. I personally don't think he's been super efficient on it. And this past week, he definitely wasn't, but he's been getting the touchdowns. But something to just keep an eye on. I personally view him as a sell just because I think his value – I don't think his value can get higher is a better way to say it. I don't think he's going to bottom out, but I think his value is like super high right now. Jalen Hurts, I don't really know if this is actionable, but something to keep an eye on. He just hasn't looked like Jalen Hurts in games. The box scores and the fantasy stats have been fine, but when you watch him playing – especially like throwing the ball, like most of the time, doesn't look like he did last year. So I don't know if it's like the offensive scheme and he's not comfortable in it yet, but something just seems off there.
The main thing for him is that Swift and whoever else has the ball love going down on the 1-yard line, and then Hurts just sneaks it in from one out every time. I watch him have like 4 touchdowns like that already.
That's the part of the contract when they sign there is like you have to go down the one so we can do now. I think they renamed it to the brotherly shove, not the push tush push anymore. But yeah, I mean those touchdowns are why the fantasy owners are not feeling the pain yet on Hurts. But like when you watch the game, like those touchdowns are keeping him afloat, and you expect it. That's part of the game, but it doesn't feel like an elite quarterback through 3 weeks based on his play. Jordan Love, we kind of talked about. I think he's at a pivotal point. I think this upcoming game will, with his all his weapons, will kind of let you know maybe what direction he's going to go in. And then a couple less owned guys who they happen to be on my team, so this is not a pump up for my team, I promise. But Zeke, he got 16 carries last week, and Ramondre got only 20, and the snap percentages are shifting a little bit there. Something to keep an eye on, but I do think this might become more of a timeshare than originally believed. I still am a Ramondre guy too, so I want to just say that I have Ramondre in a lot of other leagues. But I am a little concerned because he hasn't looked that great yet, and I think that's been opening the door for Zeke. So something to monitor there. Maybe I think Zeke is a very cheap guy you can throw on your bench in either dynasty. You could easily trade. You could probably trade like third-round pick for him, and like it could be someone that when bye weeks come, you can probably be okay. And Gallup finally this past week looked like potentially the fully healthy Gallup that we've been wanting for the Cowboys. So it was only 1 week, but something to keep an eye on. He was great 2 years ago. It took a long time to recover, but he did get the bag. Dallas believed in him. So something just also keep an eye on with Michael Gallup. But yeah, moving on from that. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on some of those players.
I know I was gonna. The only reason I wouldn't sell Kyron Williams right now is because there's nobody else on that team who's getting running back snaps. I mean, like he really is the whole show, and their schedule is not particularly challenging. Next couple games, Colts, Eagles, Cardinals, Steelers, Cowboys, Packers. I mean, there's obviously Dallas isn't great, but those are beatable defenses. And then after the bye, Seattle, Arizona again. You know, like I think that there's as long as he's out there getting 100% of the running back snaps, and he's getting 5 to 10 targets a game, then I think he'll find his way to probably a top 15 fantasy season at worst.
Yeah, and again, like that's why I made sure my phrasing was careful there. I don't think he's going to be a bad running back going forward. I just think right now a lot of people are viewing him potentially as a top 10, and that's where like if you can cash in and get someone who's like much more solidified, I would do that. And I don't know if you're going to have that opportunity later in the season.
Yeah, specifically in Dynasty too. Like I could be persuaded. I have him on a Dynasty team. I could be persuaded to sell him in Dynasty a lot quicker or easier than I could be persuaded to sell him in redraft.
Exactly, especially Dynasty, because you don't know what's going to happen next year at all. So that's why, like, I would just like see what you could potentially get for him. But yeah, with that, gonna give a quick update on our personal league. As I mentioned in previous podcasts, this is originated from our own Dynasty league that we're all members on, the Nonstop Fantasy Weekly Dynasty league that we host on Sleeper. So I want to give an update because in our league, the first 3 weeks and the last 3 weeks, you play your division mates. We have 3 divisions in the 12-team league. And the winner of each division gets an automatic top 3 seed in our playoffs. So winning your division is crucial to your success in this league. So now that we're through 3 weeks, you're kind of starting to see where some of the divisions are falling right now. And you not only did you get a win, but you made sure a division mate got a loss. So going through the first division, which we have named the Team Mandated Male Masseuses because Deshaun Watson is in this division here. In the top spot, we got Crope at 2-1. I'm in second at 2-1, and then we got Harry DaCosta at 1-2, and Scott Rapizzotti at 1-2, who did beat me this past week to get his first win. Crope definitely looking like one of the top teams there, so a little concerned about him and taking the title in our division. In Division 2, we got Schluter in the top spot at 2-1, Adam Cohen at 2-1, Joey Bottles getting his first win at 1-2 against our co-host Ryan Wilkinson and his bro Sean, who are also is at 1-2. So there's a little point differential there separating them. I think about 18 or so points, but definitely a tight group. Adam and Schluter are definitely duking out, but I wouldn't rule out Joey yet going there. And honestly, Ryan showed some definitely punching power there. He's got a lot of volatility in his team, but he can definitely play with the best of them. So that'll be an interesting division to kind of see how that works out. And then Division 3, you got Dan Rosinski, not really Matt. It's Dan Rosinski's team at 3-0, the only undefeated team. You got John Clark and Saucier, his brother-in-law. I think that's how you say that, his last name. Caffer and Mike Williams. John Clark's at 2-1. Caffer and Mike Williams at 1-2. And the Canelos at 0-3, which is a bit of a disappointment that we have so far. But I think most of us thought Dan's team was probably the strongest one for the current season. So I don't think anyone's shocked to see that 3-0 finish there. And Also, one thing I just want to give a quick update before we get our panel here to get some updates on how they think the league is developing so far. Rye Dogs here still has the lowest score on the year. It's 63.14. So he's holding on to that. He'll be funding the toilet bowl. And Crope came back after losing it actually to the Wilkinson brothers in week 2, the high score. Crope came back and retook it with a score of 177.22. So Crope is currently our leader for the high score of the year, and Ryan and Sean are the leader for the low. I'll say, I narrowly missed being the lowest score this past week by about 6 points. So I was definitely
It's
nervous.
beatable. It's beatable. That's all we wanted to see. It's possible with bye weeks coming up. It should hopefully be beaten. But yeah, we
yikes.
were disappointed that Crope stole the high from us. But his team is definitely looking very unbeatable, like we kind of thought it would be at the beginning.
Yeah, but with that being said, like, are there any teams from either of you that you're in through 3 weeks that you're surprised either that are performing better than expectations or worse than expectations?
So for me, I actually would just say Division Three as a whole has kind of been a surprise to me, except for Dan's team. I had him high, but Clark It Up, I had lower in my rankings. I'm surprised to see that they're 2-1 and they have 390 points for. So it's not like they've just gotten lucky with some of the wins. And then Mike Dexter is a god. The Mikes, I actually was higher on them. I thought they would have a pretty good team, and they do have 369 points, but they're 1-2. So that division has surprised me a bit. And, you mentioned Canellis being 0-3, a bit of a surprise. Otherwise, the other divisions, I would say, have gone kind of how I thought they would. So not as surprised with those.
Yeah, sticking on Division Three, so it's interesting how Team Rosinski coming into the year, it was guys like it was the running back room of Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, who kind of had everybody saying or projecting that team. I mean, in addition to having some pretty strong receivers, right? It was mostly the running backs. And then Chubb went down. Jonathan Taylor hasn't played a snap. Eckler has been out the last 2 weeks. Derrick Henry's kind of been trash, and it's Tua and Mostert who are coming in and kind of propelling that team to their 3-0 start. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that team, like we kind of said earlier, Mostert has a bit of an injury history. Henry is not trending in the best direction, and we'll see what happens with Jonathan Taylor. And obviously, Chubb's lost for the season. So, strong start, and it's still a very strong team. When you have Tua and Goff as your quarterbacks in a 2-team league, it seems like both of those guys, if healthy, are going to put up great numbers all year. He's in a good position, or they're in a good position, but I would probably give the nod right now in terms of strongest team to Crope across the board. I've liked what I've seen across all the positions from his team. And one of the things that we mentioned about Crope's team in the preseason was depth, guys that he had on his bench who he could throw in there. Like Ryan and I were talking before we hit record about how, depth is a real challenge in this league because we're starting so many guys, because it's 12 teams, because it's dynasty format. And if you look at Crope's bench, right, he's still got a ton of guys that he could spot start in there for points. Komet, Higbee, Sky Moore, Calvin Austin, Elijah Moore, Van Jefferson, Curtis Samuel, we talked about earlier. Jerick McKinnon scored last week. Roshan Johnson's been actually the better running back in Chicago. So, and these are all guys that are not in his starting lineup right now. So I think that the depth might end up being the difference for Crope's team. However, he also has Justin Fields and no backup quarterback on the bench. So if Fields ends up getting benched or strapped to a rocket and sent to the moon, then we'll see what happens. He's going to have to leverage that depth in his super flex spot, and then maybe that will be what enables some of the other guys in Division 1 to catch up to him. So as far as our division, I think it's still anyone's game. I'm not ready to rule out Team Wilk, although losing Mike Williams was tough.
Yeah, it's going to hurt.
It's like I said, it's the annual Mike Williams injury. It sucks this year that it's season ending. He was looking great, but again, Mike Williams was looking great before he got injured. You could probably say that about like 5 years of his career. And with Hurts and Josh Allen at quarterbacks, those two guys alone, I think could carry you guys to contention. So I think that I think that it's still anyone's game, and it's been happy to be on the board with the win, and hope to keep it going this week against a very beat up team, Rapasati.
That just beat me. I don't think there's more team that's beat up than my team right now. God, I am searching deep. I'm not kidding. I'm probably going to start like 4 tight ends 1 week. But you do what you got to do, right? Survive and advance. But with that, I guess looking ahead before we close things out to week 4, are there any specific games that are or storylines or trends that you guys are keeping an eye on looking ahead at the next week's games?
I mean, I think the highlight game has got to be the Bills-Dolphins. 2 solid offenses. Can't wait to see not only who wins that, but how high scoring that game is. I feel like it could get out of hand, but the Bills do have a decent defense, so I don't expect 70 points from the Dolphins, but it'll be interesting to see if they can keep it going.
I think the over-under right now is at 54, so that is juicy.
Yeah.
Can't wait to have some players in there. You fire up everyone.
Yeah. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, the Bears Broncos, Pooper Bowl. I'm not even totally sure that that's not going to be a supremely entertaining game, right? Like, I mean, they have everything to play for, both of those squads, right? Like, they're going to both be like all out trying to get that win. They know that what's at stake, and they both have below average defenses, so that might be a really entertaining game. And I'll mention Thursday. I'm pretty excited. We have a strong Thursday night game with the Lions and the Packers. Hopefully it lives up. It'll be exciting to see, and I think the Lions will get a win in Lambeau.
Yeah, I'm very excited. This is a great Thursday night game, and especially if Watson and Jones are back too, it'll be. I think there'll be a lot of potential options to start in there. Other games for me, I mean, the Ravens. We didn't talk a ton about the Ravens, but they just haven't looked that great, even though they're sitting at 2-1. So kind of seeing if they can get that offense clicking a little bit better. But this week is a tough one because they're playing the Browns, and these games always are like super low scoring, and the Browns defense looks legit. So kind of seeing how those two teams clash. I think the over-under is like 40 or so points in that game. The Jags for me, because I'm very invested in Trevor Lawrence, so I just want to see if they can start getting things going around. I think Trevor Lawrence is above mid-level quarterback there, but we definitely need to start seeing it. I'm also kind of excited for the Giants to not play an elite defense on Monday night, so see what this team can actually do when Daniel Jones isn't running for his life for the entire game. And also just another call out for another battle of 0-3 teams, the Vikings and the Panthers. The Vikings sitting at 0-3, I'm sure, is a shock to that organization, and I think Justin Jefferson might get 300 yards to make up for it. So I don't think that'll be a fun game to watch from. It'll go wire to wire, but I think it'll be a fun game to watch just for stats. But yeah, so those are some of the things I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah, and just noticing now, actually, as I'm looking at my notes, that Jacksonville, Atlanta is our first overseas game of the season. So just keep that in mind. Sunday morning, 9:30 a.m. Atlanta at Jacksonville.
The Jags are always overseas. It's unbelievable.
They play the next 2 games, actually. The next 2 weeks in London.
It'd be great for Trevor Lawrence.
This week against Atlanta, next week against Buffalo. So We'll see.
I got to look up some stats on how he does overseas. Maybe it's better. It's the thing that turns the tide.
They're by far the most popular team in England, so maybe, just maybe,
They're the franchise they want to move over there. I mean,
Yeah.
no one likes Jacksonville. No, who?
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who lives there.
the Red Hats.
But anyway, that is our show. So we want to thank again everyone for listening. Good luck in your week 4. And honestly, if you're 0-3, I am in a redraft. Don't give up. It's a long season. You can turn it around. Hopefully, what we say or advice we provide helps you. But thank you for listening. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the NSFW Dynasty podcast. Tune in next time.